Okay, so we're continuing in Muktzeh Machmat Chesron Kis, and we're in the Beit Yosef where we left off, still in Sif Aleph, and he goes, and now we're having another question, which is it possible that you can move it if you can move Muktzeh Machmat Chesron Kis for some purposes? So look at the Tosfos. He says like this: "V'kasvu Tosfot." This is where, and then it says in parentheses, "Kaf Kuf Kaf Gimel Amud Bet Divar Matchil Sakina." That's the Gemara that we saw that Tosfot. He says the Klim Muktzeh Machmat Chesron Kis Yesh Lizaher Shelo Litaltalo Afilu Litzar Gufo. So I mentioned that when we looked at that Tosfos. I said Afilu Litzar Gufo, which implies that also the Makomo you can't move it. V'ken Kasav Harosh V'tshuva, that you can't move it either for Gufo or for Makomo. Kevan de Litzar Gufo Asur, if you can't use it for its purpose, you can't use the not for its purpose, for itself. You can't use the special knife for cutting cucumbers. Kol shekain litzarek makomo. Certainly, you can't move it to unoccupy that place. Kedemashma begemara. What is his mashma de gemara? What is it? And then the parenthesis says kuf kaf gimel amud bet. The litzarek gufo adif militzarek makomo. The Gemara seems to be mashma also that tzarek gufo is a better reason to move it than makomo. What's the proof from kuf kaf gimel? Can anybody give it to me? What is the proof from kuf kaf gimel? Well, it's not the part that we read. It's the part that we were about to read. Joel, you.
It has to do with when they started mutarin things to be moved on Shabbos, and they first mutar gufo, and then they mutar. I remember which category is gufo before they do makomo.
Exactly. They first allowed. Let's not say muttered. Let's say hitiru. They first, if you want to use Hebrew, hitiru. They first hitiru. They first allowed muktzeh machmat gufo. And then they said also makomo. Yeah, Lexi, you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, this is also like in Abaye's version of where it ends up. That's also ends up being the psak for Dvar Shmilach Toli Yisur, right? That you can move it for gufo, but not for makomo. Right. So we also see even
by klishmato. No, we don't paskin like that.
I know we don't paskin like that, but I'm saying that like not only is that like in the process of matiring, but like
you see that he also felt that one. Yeah, okay. He also felt that one that gufo is permitted and not makomo. So fine. So gufo and makomo. By the way, how do we paskin? We basically paskin that they always go together. Gufo and makomo. There's never a case where they don't go together. But we're right now exploring the possibility that maybe he's trying to prove that in Chesron Kis, if gufo is forbidden, then makomo should also be forbidden. Because I want to use the place where the item is sitting. So he says that's what the Gemara seems to be implying, or seems to be saying. V'ken nira medivrei Rabbeinu shekatav v'samuch. And he writes, what does he write? Close by. Afilu im tzarich lo v'hu davar shemakpid alav shelo la'asot bo el malachto. V'chule asur. It's forbidden. Hare sha'af al pi shetzarich lo legufo. You want to use it for itself. Asur mipnei shemakpid alav. You can't use it for itself because it's a mila knife. Dahainu muktzeh machmat chesron kis. V'ken nirahu data Rambam b'perek kaf hey shelo hiskir heter tiltu l'tzarek gufo. The Rambam he said, also in a kind of blanket way, that Chesron Kis is also to move. And then when he talked about moving things, the Tzarek Gufo, he didn't mention it. For the Tzarek Makomo, Shelo Hizkir Hetir Tiltu the Tzarek Gufo, but the Tzarek Makomo, but Muktzeh Machmat Chesron Kis. Now, he didn't mention either of them. Neither of them did he allow. Kamosha Hizkir, Bekli Shemalach Tol Isser. But he did mention that it's permitted by Kli Shemalach Tol Isser. So you see that Kli Shemalach Tol Isser, you could move from Makomo or Gufo, but not Chesron Kiss, you can't move for either of those things. You can't move it to use it, and you can't move it to not use it. I mean, to use its place. Just one moment. Yeah, so look now in the Shulchan Aruch. I think, wait a second, I'm sorry. I could be not in the Shulchan Aruch. Where did I see this? Yeah, so now we have to look in my source sheet. I sent out. It's in Rabbi Akiva Eger. Or maybe it's a bit Yosef. Wait a second. I'm sorry, a little bit confused here. I have so many things in my head. It's going to come up. It's going to come in the Beit Yosef. All right, let's stick here in Siv Bet. Sorry, let's go on in Siv Bet. So we didn't actually read the tour. The tour, let me just read the tour. Sif Aleph. Kol kelim and italim b'Shabbat chutz mi kelim she'adam chas aleihem kegon sakin shel shchita umila v'shel sefarim dahave le ki'ilu hiktzam dahave ki'ilu haktzam. It's as though you put them aside. Kevan shemakpid aleihem shelo yitaltalam kedei shelo yifkaum v'ken kol kiyotze b'zeh. And anything like this. But he doesn't mention that you have to have a place set aside for it. He just says anything that you're makpid about it, that you don't move it, so that it shouldn't get damaged. And then in Sif Bet, he says, V'kol davar shehu kli, afilu hu gadol, v'kaved harbe, lo nitbatel shem kli, shem kli, I have the word kli twice. Lo nitbatel shem kli mimenu. No. Lo nitbatel shem kli mimenu. No. No, it must be a mistake.
I only have it once in my version.
It should only be once, I think. There.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So I'll cross that off. Lo nitbatel shem kli mimenu. Just because it's big, it doesn't stop being a kli. V'lo mipnei gadlo, v'lo mipnei kvedo. And here we have a couple cases in the Gemara of like wicker baskets, and well, we also saw, there's a case of using a heavy piece of wood to block the door. So let's look at the Beit Yosef. V'kol davar shehu kli afilu hu gadol be'erevin. And here's the case of the big. This is the case of the big piece of wood. Hahi sharita perush kora, which is a board, a beam. Dahavu be Rabbi Padat. That was in the house of Rabbi Padat. Dahavu midalola be asara. That 10 people brought it down. Be asara, by 10 adults. Vishadu la adasha. And they put it at the door, against the door, to keep the door closed at night. It was this big, heavy beam. It took 10 people to carry it.
Like it was the door bolt, essentially. It was just a really massive door bolt.
Okay, it was a massive door bolt. Thank you. And it was on Shabbos. V'lo amar lahu v'lo midi. And he didn't tell them he can't do it. Amar Torat kli alav. And he said, it's a kli. And another case, hahu asita, this mortar, some kind of thing for grinding things, I guess. Perush, machtesh, it's a mortar. The have be mar Shmuel, that was by Shmuel. The havu mechazeket adriva. It can hold an adriva, which an adriva is a half of a core, certain measure. It was a very large vessel, and you could put a half of a core in it. Sharum ar Shmuel mishde adasha. He also let them put it against the door. Amar Torah kli aleha. He said it's also a kli, and not considered a building on Shabbos. In other words, I guess that would also be the problem there. If you're putting it, you're moving it, maybe you're moving like a brick. Perush, adriva letach. I'm not sure what letach means. V'katavuma rif, and the Rif wrote these cases. So that means that you're allowed to move big items, even though it's very big. It's still considered a kli. V'harosh v'perakol kelim katav. V'harosh v'perakol kelim. The Rosh also brought it. V'katav Rav Magid v'perakaf hey shehikshu hamefarshim midamrinan besof perach b'mei madlikim. Shenechliku Rav v'Rav Yosef imutar tetaltel kaveret. There was an argument. Those the Farshim are trouble or don't understand. Let's say why this was permitted, because we have a case different where there was a dispute between Rav and Rav Yosef. If it's mutar letaltel kaveret, which is a wicker barrel, bat shlosha korid, which could contain 3 cores, ubabat arba shavin. But they both agree. But they shavin la'asur. They both agreed that if it's so big that it could hold 4, then that would be asur. But they argued about 3. They argued if 3 korin was forbidden to move, but 4 they for sure agreed was forbidden. So you see from this that sometimes if it's so big, it is asur. V'tirtzu, but Tosfot in Erevin, the kaveret ein darkar letaltela, that this barrel is like a wine barrel. You don't move it. You just leave it in one spot. And the other cases were cases where every day they would move it to the door to lock the door. It was an item that was meant to be moved. V'kol shegedola kol kach asur letaltel b'Shabbat. If it's so big and you don't move it normally, then it's forbidden. So let's say like you have an armoire in your bedroom, a big cupboard for clothes. It's very big and you don't normally move it. So then it would be muktzeh. It would be muktzeh, even though it's big. I mean, because it's big, even though we saw that other cases you could move things. But he's saying those are dafka where the thing was moved, an item that you normally did move. But your armoire, you don't move it normally. I don't know if French speakers, please. Ruven left, so nobody can criticize my pronunciation. But anyway, this big, like a bookshelf. You can't move a bookshelf on Shabbat. Aval Korah Zo Darkan Haita Taltalo. But this beam, you would move it. It was the door bolt, as Lexi said. Bekol Shah Lizgor Adelit. You would always be closing the door with it. Af b'Shabbat Mitaltalin. Ota ho'il v'yesh Torah kli alav. You could move it because it's Torah kli alav. It's very interesting. I mean, why do we have to add that point about yesh Torah kli alav? What if I had like a big rock, a boulder that I used to put against the door? You're going to say Torah kli alav? I could also move that because it's set aside as a door bolt. So I should be able to move it. But it's not. I guess it becomes a kli. Okay. I guess that's the way we're saying that you're allowed to move it. That is Torah kli. In other words, call a kelim nitalim. It became a kli. By the way, you have to, very important halacha, you have to use it one time for that purpose. It's not enough. In other words, if you want to use a brick to close your door, you can't like have the brick there and get a new brick on Friday afternoon and say, on Shabbos, I'm going to use this. You have to actually on Friday use it to close the door. I believe. Joel, you want to comment?
The distinction between a thing that's not not normally a kli that acts like a big kibul versus something that actually is a kli, right? It's something that
yeah, exactly. If it would be a chair or a big pot, then you could for sure put it against the door. but I took my example as a brick or something that would normally be muksa machmat gufo. Anything that's normally a bag of sand, something that would normally be machmat gufo, then you could move it. You could turn it into a kli, but only if you actually, not just that you pronounce that I'm going to use it. You have to actually use it once. Ori.
Why can't you move the really big kalim that are not used for that purpose? They are a kli. They really aren't. It's really agreeing, your dresser is not muktzeh to open and close the drawers. It's a kli for that, but you can't move it because that's not what its kli use usually is, and you would never move it. But why can't I move it? I mean, why can't I use it as
well,
a
that's the Gemara. The Gemara said you can't move this big wicker basket
because it's
because you normally don't. But you're asking why?
Yeah, it's already a kli. Like it's not actually definitionally.
It's not that in its usage you move, right? Like my refrigerator in its usage stays put, right? Like the massive door bolt, despite being massive, like the way of using it as a kli is one that involves it being moved. Whereas something that is technically a kli, but it is so massive that A, people don't regularly move it, and B, part of why they don't regularly move it is because that's not how you use it, right? I think it also relates to the notion of like, you don't go into Shabbos anticipating your refrigerator being anywhere besides where it is, right? Because that's like not like moving those.
It's an interesting question.
Like can I use a kli for a different purpose? Can I use a hammer
that you move
for a different purpose?
Yes, you can. So yeah, you can use a hammer.
Not the purpose I usually use it for. I always need to move it, so that's a good point. But I'm still missing why, my dresser might be a very good doorstop, even though
because
it really isn't. I guess it's
because I think what the Gemara is saying. I think what the Gemara is saying is that there is some point at which a kli ceases to be really a kli when it gets very big. Two conditions: it's very large, and you don't normally move it. If it's large and not usually moved, then even though it's a kli, it's no longer a kli.
That's the wine barrel. I could still touch it to open it to get wine.
Yeah. So actually, there's an interesting tshuva of the Har Tzvi of Tzvi Pesach Frank, a theoretical question he asks: can you turn a screw? Is that called the screw is muksa machmat gufo, right? He says you can, because when you turn the screw, it's not moving. It's turning, but it's not moving its location. It's staying in the bolt. That it's in a bolt, and you're just turning it. So I think that would also apply. I mean, among other reasons why you could open the door of the refrigerator. It's not really called moving. It's like Lexi says,
it's not carrying it. You're allowed to interact. You're just not allowed to pick up muktzeh, right? You're allowed to touch and interact with muktzeh. You just can't carry it.
You're allowed to touch it, definitely. Right. But it's a little bit of a chiddush to say you could turn it, because that's saying this actually could come up because, like, for example, there's some people that hold that you can't move the pins of a Shabbos clock because they're muktzeh, not because of in other words, I mean, obviously you move them, but like they're kli shemakol iser. You could use them. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's not a good example, but let's say maybe, I don't know. There are some people that say that, but we could say that's not called moving it. Sliding it forward and back is not called moving it. It's still in its position. Joel, you want to say something?
Two things. One, I think you'd have to get into basis, but right there, a lot of people say like moving, like swinging a door open and closed, if it's a basis, is asur, right? If you're like stuck something that's muktzeh on your refrigerator door, you couldn't open it. Well, there's things that are het there too, but let's say it only has isser in there, right? Then you couldn't open the door at that point. So
I don't know. I have to think about that.
Yeah, but no, the other thing is,
but here's the case. What if you have a ball that rolled behind the refrigerator? Apparently, it seems to me you can't roll your refrigerator out, on Shabbat. Seems to me you couldn't.
But I was going to say that this seems to fit the Rambam's theory against the Ravad about like the essence of muktzeh in the first place, right? It's like we shouldn't be moving things around on Shabbos. That's what people who do during the week. You rearrange your furniture, and so therefore things that don't normally move, you shouldn't move them on Shabbos.
Well, wait a second. You know what? Let's not get ahead of ourselves, because we got to remember what the halach is. Let's read on. Umedivrei Hilchot. So that was just all what he said. Let's just read it in the Beit Yosef. Umedivrei Hilchot. ויש תואר כלי עליו, ומדברי ההלכות ורבנו, that's the tour. Halachot is Hilchot Gedolot, right? The Bahag, I guess, right? The Shelo Hizkiru Klal Ha de Perek B'mei Madlikin. What's the case of B'mei Madlikin? That was about the wicker basket, that you can't move it. Wait a second, we just said you can't move the refrigerator because of the wicker basket, but the Torah didn't mention it. Nearly Shehem Sovrim. Shemimirot elu, I think it means like amirot elu, ein lehen ikar. These Gemaras, memrot elu, sorry. Shamemrot elu ein lehen ikar. These Gemaras are not paskind.
Just a quick thing that there's a note in the Sheret Devorah, at least in my edition here. Sometimes he used hilachot or hilchot to mean the rif, not the halachot gedolot, like the hilchot rif. And it says that here by it's quoting, and the Hilchot and Rabbeinu is the Rif and the Rambam.
Okay. Thank you. The Rif and the Rambam. Okay. Thank you. Let's try to remember that. Hilchot the Rabbeinu. That's the Rif and the Rambam. Yafeh. Shelo Hizkiru Klal. So they don't mention any of this Gemara about the big wicker basket being forbidden to move. So maybe Ori is right. Venerally, Shehem Sovrim, Shememrot Elu, Ein Lehemikr. In other words, they are not paskind. V'Rabba, V'Rav Yosef, who Shemachmirim Betiltul, because those are only by Rava and Rav Yosef, but not Rav Shimon. And we paskin like Rav Shimon. Ve'en halacha kamotan v'ken ikar ad kan. Who's Adkan? Oh, this is a Magid. Yeah, this is a Magid. So, that's why wait a second. That's why it's Rabbeinu. Because we're in the Magid, Rabbeinu is the Rambam. He's all a quote. It's Adkan Lashona. This is all a quote from the Magid. So the Magid is saying you could move your refrigerator. Wait, could you? Yeah, it's a Kli. It's definitely a Kli. And you can move it, and you could move your arm more.
That's the case of Makomo.
Yeah, you want to move it out because you want to go behind the refrigerator. You're playing hide and go seek. Yeah, you could move it. And let's see how the Shulchan Aruch paskins on this very important question of big items. Kol kli afilu hu gadol v'kaved harbe lo mitpatel shem kli mimenu lo mipnei gadlo v'lo mipnei kvodo kvedo. It's weight. Let's look at the Maggin Avram. Kaved harbe v'hu adin even gadola o kora gadola im yesh Torah kli aleihem mutter. Like we said. So, sorry for confusing everybody. You can move your refrigerator. And you can move your armoire. But we were just saying, according to the Maggid, you couldn't. That's all. I was just explaining the words. Okay. We have a little bit of time left. We can continue.
Is it possible that that's because of tircha, by the way? The idea that you wouldn't be able to move it? I know that concept comes up.
No, I think everything we're seeing is whether it's called whether it's called a kli. They're two, in other words, if it's very big and you don't use it, then it sort of goes out of the kli, it loses its cleanness. It loses its being a vessel because it's so large and it's not moved. A kli is something that's moved, right? A kli, it's not a house. A house is not a kli because you don't move a house. A kli is something that's movable. If it's not moved and it's very large, if it's very large, but you move it, that will say it's still a kli. But if it's very large and you don't move it, then it loses its cleanness. That's what I understand. Lexi.
Two things. One, connected to what you just said, there's actually an interesting distinction that's made in Bava Batra between different types of metaltalin, where it says, like, if somebody just says they're selling their metaltalin, that doesn't include things like Even if they say they're selling all their metaltalin, it doesn't include things like these like rechaim that are based in the ground that are basically never moved. But if you say you're selling anything that can be moved, it includes things like that, right? That they make this distinction between that is not related to as metaltalin because you never move it. But since it is technically a thing that you could pick up and move, unlike, say, a house, it can fall under that slightly more expansive thing. I also do think there's potentially something about the idea of when something is nearly impossible to move and something that you never do. There is also a sense in which you've designated its spot going into Shabbos, right? Like you have gone into Shabbos intending that refrigerator is going to remain where the refrigerator is, right? That your armoire is going to remain where your armoire is, right? That like those are not things that are part of like your movable environment in general.
Right.
And also like you're not using them to do tasks, right? Like if you did that, there would be like a lot of these things like a hammer, you can be using to do a task, right? When I'm moving my armoire, it's usually because I'm moving, right? Like either I've lost a ball or I'm like moving apartments, right? But it's not something that I move as part of its usage like ever. And so it is like meant to be in its place essentially.
But the case
I
of
agree with you. I
Momo
agree
is
with you.
never
But
that.
can
Momo is
anybody
always to get its place.
say again, Ori?
But the case of Makomo is always when, sure, hypothetically that kli would be used for Gufo or for its general use, but Makomo is all about when I need that spot. So that's why I just, I keep coming back to like a dresser. Right, I didn't want to move it. It's not important. It's a kli. We know it's a kli. I can open and close the drawers. But if I need its spot, then it's an interesting in between area.
Yeah, but like if I left a mortar and pestle on my table, that's like something I usually move around, right? I need its spot, but it's also something that like I don't expect the mortar and pestle to stay on my table. That's not its place that it stays. I would move it, Litzarach Makomo, because I'm going to clear my table and have a Shabbos meal. But it's not that like that's where it lives, right? It's like it's a thing that is usually moved around, and also I need the spot it's currently occupying.
I see. That's good. It's a good explanation. So Makomo is sort of usually with a kli that moves around a lot. That's what most kalim are.
Kalim, in other words, it could be that there's a kli that I don't normally think of using. Like, for example, let's say I have a very fancy, crystal goblet from King Louis XIV. And I have this kli, and I don't know, it's in my cupboard. And maybe I only use it on Leil Seder. And then all of a sudden, the King of England comes to visit me for Shabbat. Can I take it out and use it? Or do I say, no, it's Shabbat Muktzeh, I never move it. And it's in this box. I only use it on Pesach. I never thought to use it. I came into Shabbos thinking I'm not using it. What would you say? Joel.
I think you could say Ben Hashmashot. It was Muktzeh Ben Hashmashot. So unless you knew the King of England was coming beforehand, then no. So
Okay. Any contrary opinion? Yeah, Rabbi.
Yeah, I would say quickly because certain things lose their kli designation. There may be certain things that are a goblet is a kli. It doesn't necessarily lose it for any other reason. In fact, you don't have fancy gifts to your house most of the time is your problem, but it's not a kli's problem.
Right. Now, there's the kli is a kli. You can't mevatel the kliness of it. It is a kli, and it is a glass. It's a kli. You can drink from it. So when we said chesron, this is a whole nother. When we said chesron kis is forbidden, because you are afraid it's going to get broken. But that's only if. Well, there are some people that say it's only if it's a kli shemalach tol iser. Already, if it's a kli shemalach tol leheter, like a cup, then it can't be chesron kis, because if it's a kli shemalach tol leheter, then I use it. The only point is that it's kli shemalach tol iser is that I don't use it for its purpose. Its purpose is aser, And the only thing I use it for is its purpose.
You don't want to serve,
But if its purpose is mutter,
right?
then I can use it.
Well, you don't want to serve, but it's also, I think, the definition of what a kli. But, a kli doesn't necessarily or easily lose its definition. You're not
Yes.
going to serve, you can't use that kli, so you're going to serve the King of England from a drawer from your armoire. You'll pour the wine, because there's nothing to do with it.
Right. In other words, those are things that are sort of losing their kli status because they're large. But remember, we don't paskin like that.
Right.
But even if we would, we could make a distinction between that and a cup, which is clearly a kli. But I wanted to say, for example, a Brit Milah knife. If you have a Brit Milah on Shabbat, then the Brit Milah knife is not a kli shemalach tol iser, right? Because you're doing a heter with it. But if it's the Brit Milah of the 12th day, when you're not allowed to do a Brit Milah on Shabbat, so then it's kli. So then you want it, and I mean, I don't know if the kli can change. I mean, it's an interesting question, but I would say that. I mean, it's an interesting question if a Brit Milah knife is a kli shemalach tol iser or a kli shemalach tol heter, and if you're going to use it for a Brit Milah, could you also use it to cut cucumbers? That's another question.
The butcher's knife is also a really good question, because that's the only thing in the Rambam's list, I think, that like it is for cutting meat. It happens to be the butcher's business. And,
Right.
and
What's
it's
the
a
issue
fancy
there?
one that he wants to
So there
preserve.
are those mefarshim that say, what's the issue there of cutting meat? So they say, well, a butcher cuts the slices to a particular size. And the cutting of it to a particular size is maybe an isser on Shabbat.
Totally, but it's a great question for what you're asking, because even lower bar than the Milah knife, lower bar than the shechita knife. I mean, this kli is used to cut meat.
And you want to use it
in
to
a
cut
very
meat.
particular way.
Right.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the Rambam, obviously, it makes sense in the context of kelim mikarim bioter, so hefsed, and that's because you're makbid alav. So that case is.
I mean, right. We put a shechita knife there. Would a shechita knife be muktzeh on Yom Tov? Presumably not.
But again, in the case of it being your professional knife that you're makbid alav.
But I'm saying, if you wanted to do shechita on Yom Tov, you certainly could.
But if you're makpid on it, would we back at Chesron Keys?
Exactly, it's Chesron Keys.
Rambam.
Yeah, but I'm saying, is it have to also be? My question is, does it also have to be something that is malach tola iser? It's not clear 100%.
Not in the Rambam, because I think counting the Sakin Shot HaBachim to me is the only one that really
puts me out of that category. Okay. All right, let's stop here. Our time is finished. I'll send you sources for, we'll continue maybe in these sources, but we'll send you. Okay. Shkayach to everybody.